Territorial conflicts between India and Pakistan have had far-reaching effects on many other parts of Asia, not least the full understanding by India of China's One Belt, One Road initiative. At the same time, Pakistan terrorism as it joins with China to build a China-Pakistan economic corridor, which itself goes through parts of the disputed region of Kashmir. I speak with two leading experts from India and Pakistan to see if there is any common ground between the two countries. Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. For years, territorial conflicts between India and Pakistan have had far-reaching effects on the rest of South Asia and have influenced regional cooperation, especially Sino-Indian relationship. It is one of the factors that has dampened India's understanding of China's One Belt, One Road initiative. At the same time, according to the 2016 Global Terrorism Index, terrorism in Pakistan has spread from the border region to many other parts of the country. What can the international community do to help tackle terrorism in South Asia? Earlier, I spoke with Ashley Tellis, a senior fellow with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I started by asking his views on India's reluctance to put its weight behind the One Belt, One Road initiative.
The Indian view of the Belt and Road is shaped primarily by the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So if you take the China-Pakistan economic corridor aside for the moment, there is nothing in the Belt and Road concept that should cause India any particular anxiety. So the China-Pakistan economic corridor is the focal point of Indian discomfort. And the discomfort primarily arises because it passes through territories that India claims. And so I think from an Indian point of view, if China were to take initiatives that would involve greater involvement, say, in the Indian part of Kashmir, economic initiatives, I think that would be a wonderful way forward to assuage some of these anxieties. I think part of India's concern is that China does not want to interact with Indian Kashmir because it sees that as disputed territory, but is willing to work with Pakistan on the parts of Kashmir that Pakistan controls. So this is the challenge, I think, going forward.
But China has reiterated its position on the issue itself has not changed,
yes,
right, despite the project that it's undertaking with the Pakistani side. Do you think there is a communication problem, or how can this issue be resolved so that, you know, the project can move forward and maybe all three countries can benefit?
I think there is a communication problem, but more than a communication problem, there is a political problem. I think China needs to engage economically with India in developing projects that can be implemented in Indian Kashmir as well. And if that is done, then I think it opens the door to a greater understanding about what is happening on the Pakistan side of the border.
Pakistan is seen as the most dangerous place in the world by some officials in the United States. But Pakistan itself also suffers heavily. Statistics show a total of 35,000 Pakistanis have been killed between 2001 and 2011. So what do you think should be done to solve that problem in that part of the world?
Pakistan is going to remain a very difficult arena for counterterrorism, because as you point out, it is simultaneously a victim, but it is also a perpetrator. And it's a perpetrator in the sense that for many decades, the Pakistani state supported terrorist organizations that operated out of Pakistani soil. Now that position is changing, but it's changing far too slowly for policymakers in the United States and for policymakers in India. So I think the challenge that all of Pakistan's friends have is how does one help Pakistan make that transition completely from being part of the problem to being part of the solution. It will require patience, it will require time, but I think there is a need for Pakistan to show far greater effort that Pakistan itself has to make, and that unfortunately has not been consistent.
Is Pakistan's problem really rooted in Pakistan, or pretty much as a kind of spill out of the conflict in Afghanistan, because we have to take that into the picture here. How do you look at the fundamental solution to the problem there?
There is no doubt that many of the problems that Pakistan faces today have come out of Afghanistan. But it is equally true that Pakistan made important strategic choices during the conflict in Afghanistan and afterwards with respect to support for terrorist groups. So, for example, even as you and I are speaking today, Pakistan continues to support the Haqqani network, which is part of the groups that are attacking the government of Afghanistan. Pakistan continues to support the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is a terrorist group attacking India, and so on and so forth. So the challenge for Pakistan is how these groups had a certain logic and a certain purpose at a certain point in time. Now they have ceased to have that purpose. Right now, they are causing nothing but problems to Pakistan. So how can Islamabad make that shift from slowly reducing support and finding alternative solutions to these groups that it favored for many, many decades?
How do you look at the position of China, the Chinese government refusing to agree to put the head of one of the very prominent terrorist organizations that you have just mentioned? What do you think of China's rationale behind that decision?
I think China's rationale is, I can understand the logic, but I think it is not convincing. It's not convincing because there is an international consensus now that Hafiz Saeed, who is the head of the LET, is a genuine threat to international stability. And so I think China should rethink its position on that question, because it is actually beginning to undermine Indian trust in China's perceptions and Chinese objectives. And I don't think that is productive for a strong Sino-Indian relationship.
In terms of anti-terrorism, China does have problem with many Western countries because of the double standard that are often seen. For instance, after the Kunming terrorist attack, a lot of Western media journalists simply refused to call it a terrorist attack, whereas, you know, over a dozen people killed, hundreds of innocent people wounded. China insists that, you know, this is terrorism, just like what people suffer in London most recently. What do you think of the consequences of having this kind of double standard as a result in international efforts to collaborate on fighting terrorism?
I think we need to get rid of the business of double standards once and for all. We should have a very clear criterion that any premeditated targeting of innocent civilians, whatever the political cause, is unacceptable. And if we all agree to live by that standard, I think the problem resolves itself. I think it arises when some people would assert that targeting civilians is tolerable if it is done by freedom fighters.
Or by people who hold grudges because...
against the state.
Yeah.
And my view is, irrespective of what your objectives are, what is at issue here is the means used. And as long as the means involve the targeting of innocents, I believe it should be morally and politically unacceptable.
Why is it so difficult then for this standard to be adopted by countries in the world, you know, in a unified manner?
Because I think different countries have different stakes in the internal disputes of others. And if the stakes advance the interests of some countries, they find it difficult to point to the actions of some groups as terrorism. It comes down at the end of the day to politics.
What about the potential help that anti-poverty efforts can help on solving this problem? Basically, the philosophy of the Chinese government is, okay, terrorism is difficult to fight, but let's fight it from a different perspective, not using military means, but rather by helping the people coming out of poverty. When they have jobs, when they have aspiration for the future, they probably would not resort to violence.
I think it is a part of the answer, but it's never the full answer. Because most modern terrorism is not motivated by economic grievances. Most modern terrorism is motivated by political grievances. And the solution to a political grievance, I think, is a political solution. Now, part of that may involve some degree of economic assistance or economic outreach, but I don't think it substitutes for political engagement. And so going back to the issues of conversation, negotiation, dialogue, is far more productive rather than focusing on economic solutions primarily.
To get the Pakistani perspective, joining me now is Mr. Imtiaz Gul, based in Islamabad. He is the Executive Director of the Center for Research and Security Studies. Mr. Gul, thank you for joining us today. Now, the latest string of terrorist attacks occurring across Pakistan in February left over 100 people dead and hundreds wounded. Pakistan is also accused of being the condoning or sheltering place for terrorist activities in the past. What do you think of this criticism? Is that fair in your eyes?
Well, in the past it could have been fair to a greater extent, but the last 10 years or so have seen a big shift in Pakistan's security policy. One has to, however, keep in mind that as the Western duplicity that you have been talking about with our guest from Washington is very much evident also in the case of Pakistan or in the case of a country like China. Here in our countries, the Western governments as well as analysts tend to see everything in black and white, disregarding the various gray shades that exist because of geopolitics. So this is the geopolitics that has denied Pakistan the due recognition of its efforts against terrorist or militant groups. We have been the victims. Of course, there have been in the past there were policies that have been responsible for the spate of terrorism and religious radicalization in this country. But I think the government and the military together have been trying to turn this around, and your guest from Washington, I think, rightly pointed out that India as well as other countries need patience and also need to advise Pakistan, help Pakistan making this transition from a policy which used non-state actors as instruments of foreign policy, and now that a number of those proxies or those non-state actors have been taken on. Yes, Haqqani network or Afghan Taliban, this is mixed up with the terrorists, real terrorists who are serving as proxies for other countries. The Haqqani network or Mullah Umar's Taliban, Afghan Taliban, they are legitimate interlocutors for the Afghan government as well as for the international community, evident from the fact that the Afghan Taliban, including the Haqqani network, have an internationally recognized office in Qatar, Doha, and foreign dignitaries keep meeting with them in order to find a solution as to whether they are ready to indulge in talks with the Kabul government. So we have to, I think, keep in mind the various gray shades of geopolitics that keep influencing the policies and the movements in countries like Pakistan.
Now, we have seen the efforts by the Pakistani government made in fighting terrorists. For instance, you had the Zab-e-Azb in 2014, a military operation to destroy and disrupt Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist networks. However, these efforts seem to have failed in stopping terrorist attacks. What do you think are the reasons behind the perceived lack of progress by the Pakistani government in this front?
You know, I think we are dealing with the legacy of the past 40 years or so, and it's not easy to rub that off or contain this. Containment, I must say, underline, has happened, particularly since June 2014, and that is evident from the statistical graphs that are available. Our Center for Research and Security Studies has also conducted studies, and it suggests that acts of terror have declined drastically, 60 to 70% across the country. There was, however, one wave of terrorism that we witnessed in February, which saw at least 110 people killed. That was a very coordinated terror campaign organized by one of the non-state actors, proxies, that is Jamaatul Ahrar. And I think it was very synchronized attacks, one after the other. And we shall have to, I think, deal with this situation for quite some time. However, we have to also recognize that Pakistan has to do a lot more. It has done a lot. The Pakistan military, the civilian intelligence and security forces, they need much more focus, much more coordination. But with whatever they have done, they have brought down the graph of violence, the incidence of violence in the last 3-4 years. It is a long way to go. As long as Pakistan has political problems with India as well as with Afghanistan, I think we shall have to deal with and live with the proxy war that Pakistan is facing.
Let's talk about another contentious point between India and Pakistan. That is the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar. India wants him to be listed as a UN terrorist, recognized terrorist, but Pakistan does not want that, and China is also blocking that effort. Many are questioning the rationale behind Pakistan's stance. What is the official reasons by the Pakistani government of not listing him as a terrorist?
Jaish-e-Mohammed is officially banned in this country. However, its infrastructure, that infrastructure means mosques, seminaries where we have tens of thousands of students learning. And I think that is probably one big reason why the government is not drastically cracking down on the infrastructure of Jaish-e-Mohammed or Lashkar-e-Taiba. Both are Kashmir-focused organizations. They are not carrying out any attacks inside Pakistan. However, we as civil society keep reminding the government that whoever as a non-state actor takes up arms against Pakistan or against any other country has to be dealt with in accordance with the law. And I think gradually Pakistani government is squeezing space on these two organizations. And as again, let me go back to our guest from Washington. Pakistan will need some time to turn this entirely around. It cannot happen overnight because there are extremely serious socio-political implications if Pakistan were to really crack down in a military way on Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed. This is not going to be very easy. There will be a lot of bloodletting in this country. And I think probably this is one reason why the security forces are not going the whole hog. And I am sure the Chinese government will also understand how dangerous it can be. We see the results in Afghanistan. 16 years of bloodletting has not led to any peace there, not any stability. So we cannot, I guess, allow Pakistan to sink into another or become another Afghanistan by going after all those groups who are also politically connected. It's not that Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed stand alone. There's a lot of political sympathy, empathy, which basically makes it very difficult for the state and state institutions to crack down on them.
Well, China's position also is that this is a situation primarily between Pakistan and India, so these two countries have to resolve it first before China can change its stance. Now, another contentious issue is the China-Pakistan economic corridor. India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar visited Beijing in February, and he had a strategic dialogue with China, but he said that China's CPEC violates India's sovereignty because the corridor runs through India-controlled Kashmir. My previous guest, Ms. Telly, also says China has not yet engaged India in economic initiative in this project. That is the reason why India is holding grudges, or India is having some discomfort on this project. What is your reaction to all that?
Well, I think India's opposition to the One Belt, One Road or China-Pakistan economic corridor is not rooted in China's reluctance to engage Indian Kashmir. This reluctance is an willful reluctance to oppose China-Pakistan projects. And it's very clear the past year and a half, the Chinese foreign minister, Indian foreign minister, Indian home minister have been openly criticizing and opposing the China-Pakistan economic corridor under the One Belt, One Road, primarily because they think that China-Pakistan relations could be detrimental to the interests of India. The notion of China's reluctance to engage Indian Kashmir, I think, is an afterthought. It has nothing to do primarily. India wants Pakistan to forget about Kashmir, and the opposition of India to the One Belt One Road initiatives primarily is rooted in this particular issue, that because Pakistan has taken a principled position, over an issue which is still very much alive at the United Nations. India has refused to adhere to the United Nations resolutions, and one has seen for months the bloodshed that took place in Indian Kashmir after the killing of one Kashmiri militant leader. So India had made it very clear before July 8 onward violence in Kashmir that they don't like this they call it nexus. A number of Indian analysts in fact call Pakistan Economic Corridor as a China-Pakistan nexus, which shows how derogatory language they sometimes tend to use when it comes to China-Pakistan cooperation.
Well, my understanding, or the understanding of many Chinese scholars, is that this project, the CPEC project, is actually open. If India would be willing to jump on board, this project will be open to Indian partners. What is the Pakistani reaction to this idea? Will the Pakistani side embrace this corridor if there are Indian enterprises joining the project?
I think Pakistan has offered, actually, because it's a mutual consensus between China and Pakistan to allow every country benefit from this. Pakistan has, I think, offered Afghanistan as well to join it, because if Pakistan were to oppose a country A or country B's inclusion in the CPEC, that would be defeating the basic objective of CPEC or One Belt One Road, and that basically means regional connectivity, opening new avenues for trade, for creating regional linkages. So I think Pakistan is, as we understand from the statements of our government, is very much open to the involvement of any regional country. Iran, for instance, has offered to be part of CPEC, and Pakistan has no objection to that. So I think Pakistan is looking at it from the perspective of regional trade connectivity, and that's a great idea if India were also to get involved.
Well, I think maybe the name of the CPEC is the one that is arousing quite a little bit of suspicion. The moment people hear it, they think that this is between China and Pakistan, but it's just an idea here. What do you think of the potential effect economic development, if successful, can have on the social stability of that part of the world?
Well, I'm sure it will have a huge impact on Pakistan's internal stability. CPEC or projects under CPEC have come as a big boon for Pakistan in a situation in which most Western countries have refused, number one, to lift the travel advisories on their citizens to Pakistan, and secondly, they have stayed away from investments in Pakistan. So if Chinese are sticking their neck out with multi-billion-dollar projects promising more energy for this country, promising productivity, and promising more investments in the industrial sector, I think that will be a huge contribution to Pakistan's economic progress, and which obviously leads to internal social political stability.
Finally, from our discussion here, there seems to be quite some lack of mutual trust in China and India, and this is no secret. India sees that China and Pakistan enjoy a better relationship, the so-called all-weather partnership. That is why India is also leaning towards other countries such as Japan or the United States, so that China can be contained, in their words. How do you think we can really achieve common prosperity in South Asia, in Asia, and in this new era we're looking at with a new US president? How do you think the problem can improve in the near future?
I think all countries involved shall have to set aside their major political differences And even if there are differences, they can continue talking about them, talking out their differences. And I think that is the key to One Belt, One Road initiatives, which is a huge, great vision, I think, for every country, and particularly for a country like Pakistan. So I think the best way forward is for India, Pakistan, Afghanistan to be the idea of inclusive development, inclusive trade, and probably that inclusive trade and development could help them overcome their political differences as well. So they have to continue this path as their political differences persist and they continue talking about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Imtiaz Gul, Executive Director of the Center for Research and Security Studies, joining us from Islamabad, Pakistan. You're watching The Point. My last point is coming up right after this. It's a sad but oft repeated truism that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. With both India and Pakistani attitudes so entrenched over the Kashmir region for 7 decades, no one is holding their breath for an immediate solution. Although China is building an economic corridor with Pakistan through a region claimed by different parties, China has never excluded India from coming on board. Rather, the issues between Pakistan and India need to be resolved bilaterally. China believes that political decisions should not hinder economic development in the region. In the long term, the two protagonists will need to realize this basic truth. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the CGTN Live application to watch our show on your mobile devices. For previous shows, go to the CGTN channel of YouTube, click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. That's it for this edition. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.